Hey everybody. This week I experienced something that left me stunned. 10-year-old me has been vindicated by progress. Let me tell you why younger me was involved. It was the 1970s. It was the age of disco, and my brother and I sat in front of a Texas Instruments Silent 700 terminal with the telephone handset firmly lodged in the acoustic coupler muffs. My dad had been bringing the terminal home from work and letting us use it to play computer games. Now, nobody in the mid-1970s had a computer at home. Nobody. Nobody knew what computer games were. We would play text-based games on this thing. Now, you really couldn't do anything else because that was the only kind that existed, but this was a printing terminal, so it used thermal paper, just like the thermal paper in receipts that turns black when you add heat to it. So that's how the terminal worked. And so my dad would bring home rolls and rolls of thermal paper, and we would go through them as we're playing all these various text-based games. And there were games like, I remember one of them was Star Trek, and there was one called Mugwump, and then there was Colossal Cave. It was just called, I think it was called Adventure, but it's known to the world as Colossal Cave, and a very well-known game. We spent hours and hours of dial-up time struggling to navigate the intricate caverns and mazes of the cave. Who can forget you are in a twisty maze of passageways all alike and its evil twin? You are in a twisty maze of passageways all different. And then came the day we thought, how do you make one of these games? How do you make one of these games? And in our youthful exuberance and innocence, remember, I was 10 and my brother was 12. We set out to figure out how to make a game of our own. And we poked around on the operating system. We didn't even know what an operating system was. We tried different commands. We typed help, and it gave us some useful leads. At one point, I remember seeing a command that seemed quite promising, and it seemed like we could ask for more detailed help. And we tried it. And we watched in horror as some distant system operator replied, "I'll see what I can do to get you an answer, Tim." That was my dad's name. So we knew that our stupid childlike typing was being read by some dude at work, and the next day my dad was going to hear from this guy at work, and who knows what was going to happen. That was caused a panicky moment. Dad never said anything about that. One thing I remembered was that to run a program, we would type old, and it would say old file name. And we would type in the name of the file, and it would load it, and we would run it. Well, that's how we ran the Caves game. And I thought, well, why not just type in new instead? And sure enough, it let us type in new, and it made a new file. We went about using this thing called Tico, which was a line editor that was fairly cryptic, but we figured it out, and we began to edit our own file. And we had this great plan of what we were going to do. I know my brother was into fantasy, and he said, "Oh, let's make this game. It's going to be about sword fighting." And so we started typing into the text file in plain English sentences like, "This is a game for 2 players, and each player has a sword and can choose the moves that they will make with that sword. And your choices are thrust, slash, and parry," and so on and so forth. I don't remember the details of it, but that's what we did in our childlike minds. We thought that's how you wrote a program, and we saved it. And that was interesting. Figure out how to save it. We saved the file, and then we followed the same steps that we had done with the other programs to run them. And of course, we were rewarded with a whole flurry of error messages as the terminal printed and printed pages of gobbledygook telling us that we didn't know what we were doing. It was certainly a letdown. Kind of like when you get your first paycheck and you realize that the government takes a quarter of it before you even see it. It's one of those things, just reality coming to roost. Kind of sad. Well, we would laugh about it for years to come, about how we were so naive to think that you could just write English sentences and have the computer write the program for you. And I was just thinking about this today, because Recently at work, we began using Microsoft's Copilot, which is a tool that sits on top of ChatGPT 4. And most people in my group are using it for things like authoring complex documents and summarizing email chats and finding things that they have to do and summarizing their work week, things like that. And I knew that we were just scratching the surface of what you could do with this. I've been a software engineer for decades, although I haven't done proper software engineering in a few years now. I'm in a different part of the organization. But I knew that there's got to be more that you can do with this. And I've heard rumors about what people have done with ChatGPT and code. I said, let me just try this out. So I went in and I threw in a few softball requests. I said, hey, could you write this simple SQL query? I want to be able to look at some data in the database. Could you write this query for me? And then I said, maybe I could do better than that. I said, write a Java application. It will connect to an Oracle database with credentials provided on the command line. It'll query the emp and dept tables and write the output to CSV in a file. And it did exactly that. I was stunned. When I asked it how to compile the file, it even told me, you're going to need this Oracle JDBC jar file, and this is where you go get it. I spent the next few days having Copilot create many handy command line utilities that would do a lot of the troubleshooting tasks that I do. Things like network troubleshooting, stuff like that. At one point, I'm thinking about my machine shop roots. I said, write a Windows application in Java with two text fields, one called inches and the other called millimeters. And when the user types a value in the inches field, convert that to millimeters and put that in the millimeters field. And if the user types something in the millimeters field, convert that to inches and put it in the inches field. And this one ran without even the slightest hitch. I looked at the little program that was running, the little window of the application, and I thought about it. I said, machinists care about hundredths of a millimeter and thousandths of an inch. Maybe I can get the program to work better. And I said to Copilot, display the results in hundredths of a millimeter and thousandths of an inch. And Copilot said, sure, I've made the changes to the program, so now it will display the values in hundredths of a millimeter and thousandths of an inch. I copied and pasted what was generated, and it ran perfect. It did exactly that. Is it perfect? No. Copilot and ChatGPT, it's kind of like having a very junior developer that you send off to do basic programming tasks. They come back and they say, here, I did it for you. And they hand you the result, and you look at it and you say, wow, yeah, this is great. You missed this edge case and you missed this one. And what about if the user doesn't provide any values at all? What are you going to do? And then they say, okay, I'll go work on it. And then they come back and they say, here you go, here's the new version. And you look at it, wow, you messed something up over here. Can you fix that? And they take it and they fix that. And then you say, could you go put comments in all your code? And they go away and they come back and it's all commented. This blew my mind. And I know this is just very quaint for a lot of software engineers. I talked to some of the software engineers at work, and they've been using this for quite some time, doing all kinds of stuff and making fancy functions and things like that, pieces of their code. This is great. And I guarantee you in a year or two, this video is going to seem super quaint with the way things are advancing. But man, it made me so happy to realize that 10-year-old me has finally been vindicated. Copilot would have taken our childish attempt at a game and would have actually written something. And it would have replied to our responses as we critiqued its output. At the end of the day, this is technology that absolutely meets the hype in my mind. And it does what it says on the tin. We've been told for years and years and years about virtual assistants that will help us, start with Clippy and Microsoft and, of course, Siri. We all know how well Siri does things. Just glorified Google's what it is. But this, if I asked it to do the same program again, It'll do it, but it'll do it possibly in a different way using an entirely different approach. It doesn't do the same thing twice the same way. And that's really interesting. This is clearly something that is artificial intelligence. In another way, the experience brought me right back to the 5th grade with the silent 700 terminal. That device, that machine, ran at 300 baud, and it was an exercise in patience to watch as the print head went left to right, and it slowly printed out the lines at a snail's pace. 300 baud is slower than reading pace. 1200, for those of you who remember, was just about reading pace. 300, man, that was slow. That's about how fast Copilot writes its answers, and it's tedious. On top of that, once things start getting complicated, it has this maddening habit of printing 3/4 of the answer, then all of a sudden, it whisks it away and suddenly says, "Something went wrong. Please try again later." It still needs work. Thank you for watching.